or fiction.
Sorry about that.
As everyone is aware, our topic for today is adaptive fictions. And the default assumption in evolutionary science is that it should be adaptive for an organism to perceive the world as it is. That is, seeing reality accurately should help survival and reproduction. Sort of seems like a no-brainer. But is this assumption always true for our species? Is it possible to have rational, irrational beliefs? That is, can we have beliefs which are instrumentally rational, that is useful, but epistemologically irrational? What about positive illusions or the placebo effect, or beliefs that, even though they're false, improve group cohesion? So if Anna would show my first slide, I have 2 slides that I made up for today. One way, I'll wait for that to be there. One way that I began to think about the topic of adaptive fictions is that a belief can be true or false, as well as helpful or harmful. And if you think about it that way, it yields 4 categories of beliefs: true and adaptive, which would be adaptive fiction; false but adaptive; true but harmful; and false but harmful. And to illustrate the difference between cells 2 and 4, consider false optimism and false pessimism. False optimism is usually helpful, so that would be a cell 2 kind of belief. False pessimism is usually harmful, so that would be a cell 4 type of belief. Theoretically, at least, it seems to me these 2 dimensions should be independent of each other. In practice, however, I suspect false beliefs are more often harmful than helpful. Cell number 3 in particular, where is true but harmful? Cell number 2, true but harmful. That's a troubling category to think about. And perhaps we can explore that one further in our discussion. Let's say you want to get rid of your false but harmful beliefs, but keep all your false but helpful beliefs. Can you decide which of your false beliefs to jettison and which to keep? And philosopher Maarten Boudry says no, because the minute that you realize your belief is false, you can no longer hold it. And this highlights an important point about this table. It shows an external observer's perspective. From the person's viewpoint, all the beliefs in the table are believed to be true. So after I made up this table and began thinking about it a little bit, it occurs to me that it maybe has some usefulness as an initial way to begin to grapple with the topic, but it's oversimplified and it has some shortcomings. And let me quickly mention what I think those complications are, and then open it up for discussion. So if you go to the second slide, Anna, and you'll see a slight difference at the top. Instead of helpful and harmful, I've called it net helpful and net harmful. And that's because when you think about it, a single belief can be both beneficial and harmful. For example, a false belief may be helpful in the short run, but harmful in the long run. So all beliefs have a cost-benefit ratio, and it's probably more accurate to label the top of the table whether a belief is net helpful or net harmful. A second complication is that some beliefs are strongly held and some are weakly held. So the strength of conviction in a belief may modulate how much help or harm is done. Third, a false belief can become a true belief. So a false belief can operate, if you will, as a self-fulfilling prophecy, in which case it eventually can transform itself into a true belief. For example, if I believe myself to be more competent at a particular task than I am, I'm likely to perform better at that task, and thereby I may make my slightly inflated self-image come true. Fourth, most false but adaptive beliefs could be exchanged for a true belief that provides the same benefit. For example, atheists acknowledge that a belief in God has the benefit of providing a sense of belonging to a community, but assert that a shared secular belief system such as humanism could provide the same benefit. People have argued that before the Enlightenment, there really was no way to not believe some falsehoods. But since the advent of science, there is a way, and we should therefore seek to replace false but adaptive beliefs with true and adaptive beliefs. Fifth, beliefs have a social dimension. How many people hold the belief? If I alone hold the belief that there are aliens among us, it is considered a delusion and I'm crazy. But if 50,000 other people hold that same belief, I'm not considered crazy. Well, perhaps not considered crazy, but it can be the basis for identity and belongingness. Or consider the belief that my nation is superior and exceptional. In an essay on Pro-Social World, David Sloan Wilson has written, quote, adaptive fictions are especially pernicious in their consequences when they are collectively adaptive, benefiting everyone in a group at the expense of other groups. Lastly, this exercise got me wondering, can you will yourself to believe a falsehood? And at first blush, the answer seems to be no, for if I know a belief is false, how can I convince myself it's true? For example, I think it would be hard to will myself to believe the earth is flat, since I know that the claim is unsupported. On the other hand, many people adopt religious beliefs taught by their parents despite varying degrees of doubt. Some people, it seems to me, literally will themselves to believe, to have faith, while many others wish they could believe, but they just can't. Lastly, of course, Freud's answer to the question about whether or not we can will ourselves to believe a falsehood is an unequivocal yes, although the willing is mostly an unconscious process. That is, nearly all of us sometimes push uncomfortable truths about our past and present out of our awareness and pretend things are rosier than they were or are. So if we get rid of the table, I'll ask my question and we can kick off a conversation about this topic. So the question I have to start with is, if I had a magic wand and I could wave it and rid you all of your false beliefs, would you want me to wave it? Remember, by definition, you don't know which of your beliefs are false. So if I wave the wand, you're not quite sure what's going to happen. Do you want to keep your illusions or not? And I suppose the way to ask this question for you Matrix fans is, do you want the blue pill or the red pill? So with that, I will toss it open for discussion and conversation.
Yeah, brilliantly clear, Steve. Beautiful.
Thank you, Andy. Who wants me to wave the wand, or who doesn't want me to wave the wand? Yeah, Bob.
I do not want the wand. Well, two reasons. I am a believer that you can, the phrase I have often heard is fake it till you make it. I am a believer that you can make yourself believe something, but it takes a long time. And I think this is best illustrated by an aphorism or a saying that it is really tough to make someone believe something that is contrary to their financial interest. So but I do think that can be done, that you can decide what you're going to believe. But that's not the reason I'm not taking the pill. I'm taking the pill because that journey to uncover what is real, which of my beliefs are false, that journey is too valuable. That is too precious to me. I don't want your pill.
Oh, so you would like the what the pill would do, but you don't want a pharmaceutical to get you there. You want to do it yourself.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Even if I'm disappointed at the end of that journey, I want that journey.
Anna, Hank, and then Diane.
So I think that while it would be helpful to have truth, I think that that's objective truth is very important to keep contact with reality. I do think that what I've heard is that people who tend to be the smartest, the most objective, also tend to be the most oppressed. So I think that when you have that truth, you also see a lot of things about yourself and the people around you that probably could be very harmful to your mental health. So I would not like it. If we could have like a halfway point, I'd like to know more truth, but not the whole truth.
You know, you're raising the topic of depressive realism, which is the notion that people that see the world more realistically have greater tendency towards depression. One of the articles that I had given as a resource today even suggested that what was accomplished in cognitive therapy was to create false optimism in people. That's what it accomplished. Lately, however, there's been some research which has questioned the depressive realism. It may not be as robust as we think, but at any rate, who did I say was next? Hank, Diane, and then Andy.
Hi, folks. Didn't get to say hello. Wow, a lot of thoughts, but let me focus on objective reality, if it's possible, or truth. I will just say, from what I've learned, it's not possible because of subjectivity and our own personal blueprint or thumbprint or mind print, and the whole notion of Umwelt. I forget the biologist who talked about. He was talking about bats see the world differently than we do because of their physical makeup. The other is so if we have our own subjectivity and our own Umwelt, my view is that each of us has our own Umwelt, and it's not conscious. It's not unconscious. It's not conscious. It's in a level of unawareness, the way the mind and the body work together, the way the brain works. So we have that problem about if we each have an Umwelt, how are we going to decide, except through banding together and say, well, we will agree that this is a chair and this is a chair with 3 legs or 4 legs, but
Yes.
To me, that chair, which I'm not aware of, is something else to you, to everybody else. So I'm trying to be simplistic on that. There was some French philosopher who talked about, he didn't agree with Freud, and I forget the guy's name, but he talked about that the basic human terror is of being too much alike. And I forget, anybody remember the name, but if that's so, if there's some terror of being too much alike, and we've got this Umwelt, we've got this subjectivity, it's going to be impossible to suggest that there's an objective reality. But so the question is, like in pro-social or anywhere, to get people to cooperate, it's a major feat to do that.
No, your first point, Hank, reminds me of a conversation I had last night with my eldest son, who is a former philosophy major when he was an undergrad, and I mentioned that I was going to be leading this discussion, and he said, well, Dad, the whole world is an adaptive fiction for everybody because because nobody perceives reality accurately, and he said, talk about the blind spot, which is, when your vision has a blind spot and your mind fills it in. So his philosophy of mind background, suggested that everyone lives in a fiction, and when you look at it from that vantage point. Interesting.
Can I say just one more thing? I'm going to keep it quick, but in terms of dual inheritance theory and the cultural component, your information is going to be filtered through your particular larger culture, smaller culture, subculture, whether it's your community, it's your parents, and it's not always communicated explicitly. Sometimes the information is implicit. So then to get a bunch of people to agree on some reality is an interesting thought experiment and a world experiment. And, so we work with it. And as a therapist, you work with it like in different ways. Okay. Thanks for hearing me out.
Diane, Andy, do you mean to put your hand down, Andy?
No, I think I did that
okay. So Diane, Andy, and then Ken.
Okay. I'm in total sympathy with your son, Steve. And also with a good deal of what Hank was saying. I don't think we have any reason to think that as living creatures, we have veridical perceptions about the world.
Mhm.
We have useful perceptions. Our whole set of our perceptual set, just like the bats or the monkeys or anybody else, is set up in such a way as to facilitate most of the time our survival and our reproduction. And if anything is going to be adaptive, if we're going to look at what's adaptive, it's not a matter of whether we're comfortable with these beliefs or whether they make us feel better or they make us more productive or skillful or this or that or the other. I mean, those may be some details to look at, but it seems to me that what we should be asking is, okay, are we, let's say, adaptively programmed to believe, to just have beliefs rather than to just have perceptions?
Mhm.
And that probably fits in with the little discussion we were having in the beginning about what stories are all about, because beliefs are probably stories, at least in some form. So I think the functionality of false or true beliefs, either one, at the individual level is not really what we're talking about. We're talking about the functionality of believing to the species. And one more point, and then I'll shut up too. We are group living creatures, and a great many of our beliefs, and especially the ones that we think may be false, if we were able to have more veridical perceptions, have something to do with group beliefs, the religions, the philosophies, the ideologies, and so on and so forth. And I think it's quite clear that we are endowed with a strong inclination to have these group-centered beliefs.
Mhm.
And I think we have to see that then in the multi-level selection.
Okay.
Okay, so that's it.
Just one fast comment before moving on to Andy. It seems to me there are sort of two levels of analysis to talk about this topic. One is, I guess I would describe it as philosophy of mind, and the whole point you were just making, Diane, and my son made. The other level, slightly more prosaically, is to talk about things that are not factual in a scientific sense. The earth is flat. Homeopathic medicine is effective, things of that nature. And that simply, is it harmful for people or helpful for people to believe non-factual things at that level? And they just seem like different types of conversations, but we can have both. Andy and then Ken.
Yeah, a couple things. I think so philosophers going back centuries have played with the idea that none of us ever sees reality as it is, that all we ever do is have instrumental fictions.
Mm-hmm.
And I think in some sense that's true, right? So you look at the fact that we only perceive things in a certain small range of the electromagnetic spectrum, and then we're completely oblivious to all kinds of signals that many other creatures can tune in on. Yeah, and so our biology conditions and shapes our reality, and it does so in a way that is at least purportedly adaptive. All of that's true, but even within that world, there's an important, it's not that the idea, not all adaptive or non-adaptive beliefs are on a par. So the idea that there's something more than non-utility wrong with the idea that the world is flat.
Mm-hmm.
So the world is flat can disadvantage you in various ways, but it's also wrong in another sense, that in another important sense that we need a word for. So even within a world where subjectivity just goes with the territory, like all of us are endowed with subjectivity, and so yes, that colors our perceptions. Even within that, we have to find a way to distinguish between truth and falsehood. So it's important not to drink so much of the philosophical Kool-Aid here that we give up on truth and falsehood and say, oh, well, we just have to make do with things that are more useful falsehoods. Does that make sense?
It makes great sense. It's a much more articulate version of what I was just trying to say just before you. But leave it to an epistemologist to be able to say that with crystal clarity. Thank you, Andy.
Well, I'm glad that was helpful. One other thing, just back to the question you posed to us at the beginning, would I take the red pill or the blue pill? Have you all heard of the Lake Wobegon effect? So right, and so in
Yes.
Lake Wobegon, all the children are above average.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it turns out psychological surveys show that almost everybody thinks of themselves as above average. Something like 98% of us think we're above average. It's a big number. That suggests that the illusion of one's superiority is adaptive. So I think it would be unwise to take, I forget which pill is red, which pill is blue, but I think it would be unwise to accept the magic wand, replace all of your false beliefs things. We might very well end up with all kinds of unintended psychological problems, social problems. We don't really know what it would be like to have a worldview utterly free of illusions, but I'm not as convinced as Maarten Boudry is that would be an unmitigated good. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Andy. Nicely said. Ken?
Okay, some responses here. To expand on what Diane said, I am convinced that there is in our DNA an epigenetic trait, an impulse that actually causes us to be interested in belief, to attach tremendous, two of them, what I call a reverie trait and a belief trait, one that is interested in ideas that have no basis in fact. And these are two of, and one that causes us to put great importance in it. And these are two of the four epigenetic traits that are behind organized religion, which is historically been the glue that has held tribal groups, or what Edward O. Wilson, my guru, has described as the eusocial evolutionary pattern, in which we've formed groups by adopting different roles in defense of a common nest. And then throughout history, religion has been the glue that has held these together. It's only in the last 2,000, 2,500 years that has started to fall apart in some places in the West, for example, but in the East, in around the Levant, it's still, of course, very, very strong. You still have a very strong symbiotic relationship between religion and government. But anyway, I think that trait is there. So there's actually it's in your DNA, that tendency for belief, Diane. I also wanted to mention that in terms of whether something is adaptive or non-adaptive, I think there are three areas of epigenetic traits, these drives or inclinations that we have. One is towards the self, protection of the self. One is for protection and advancement of the family. And then you have the eusocial one at the group level that Edward O. Wilson told us about. Or I was just reading, what was I reading? Our Tribal Future, he calls it a tribalism or tribal instinct. I like Edward O. Wilson's. So you have three areas. So something can be helpful towards oneself, but harmful towards the group, and vice versa, family. So you have it gets very complicated. And the last thing I'm going to say, not to waste time, but and it's very interesting. I saw someone from the UU Buddhist Federation was here. And I don't know if he turned into Sam Trumbo or if he just logged off. but my view is probably going to be fairly close to his. I've been hosting a mindfulness practice over the last 10 years, and our essential view is that, yeah, we lie to ourselves, and most of the times we do so is because we cannot face the truth, and that we are not able to see it without great upset. And of course, what we do in a mindfulness process is we try to see ourselves doing that, creating the false impression and seeing what the upsetting part of it is, and being in a position to have a different relationship with it. So I think it is possible. So I would argue that it is probably, you can never be 100% with the truth. I mean, there's a lot of gray, as you know, your eye is always going to black out that, whiten up that little black spot. And there are some things, there's some perception you're never going to be able to change completely, but you can minimize it. I think it's healthy, and I think you do so by establishing a different relationship with it. Instead of it happening to you, you're being able to be in a position in which you can see yourself doing it.
Very, very nice. It reminds me, Ken, of I hope I pronounce his name correctly, Jonathan Galshaw. Am I pronouncing it? The storytelling animal, the author of The Storytelling Animal, who says that we really shouldn't be called Homo sapiens. We should be called whatever the Latin is for the Homo who tells stories. That creating narratives is somehow wired in our DNA. By the way, of the three things you listed, protecting the self, protecting the family, and then the eusocial aspect, from a Richard Dawkins selfish gene point of view, the first two are the same. Protecting yourself and protecting your family to some degree is protecting your DNA, if you will. But
well, so is protecting your group.
Yes.
If you adopted different roles in defense of a common nest, you are in fact protecting your DNA.
Right.
When a soldier gives his life for his country, he's protecting his DNA. His children are taken care of. His family is the hero. His family is succored.
And another way to talk about adaptive fictions, when we go back to that storytelling aspect, is that some narratives are helpful and some narratives are harmful. And some of the narratives that are helpful to my tribe are harmful to your tribe. So it gets very complicated. I'm going to go to Christopher because he hasn't said anything yet, and then to Hank.
I was so I study story, and one thing you were touching on there is it seems that story is adaptive. We're trying to figure out. It's easy to imagine why it might be adaptive for the teller, but the real conundrum is why is it adaptive for the listener? But so it seems that this temporary suspension of disbelief, and I guess the key word I'm thinking about there is temporary, is that we temporarily suspend disbelief to become part of this system, and it seems to serve us well to temporarily suspend that disbelief. And I did want to point out this as well. When Tubi and Cosmides talk about story, they talk about us completely buying into, how do I pronounce this? Veridical. That's what I'm trying to say. I do most of my reading as reading and not talking with anybody. Is that is actually not true, because if you look at how we respond to to fictions, we're very offended by coincidence, especially positive coincidence. So where we welcome positive coincidence in life, we love it, serendipitous. In story, it's an absolute disaster. If you're the teller, that's disastrous. So we are not actually completely suspending disbelief. You must honor some part of the world to keep us paying attention.
That's very interesting. The whole topic of suspending disbelief temporarily does add a new layer to talking about all of this. I hadn't thought about that, Christopher. That's very interesting. Hank, Rob, and then back to Ken.
Yeah. So here's the thought experiment. We're talking about whether adaptive beliefs or beliefs are adaptive. What are we talking about? Are we talking about our narratives or beliefs adaptive for the purpose of the survival of the species and reproduction? And then why then extend it to all other facets of the human condition and survival? I can say that if we study what's adaptive in order for the species or for you and your family or your tribe to survive and reproduce, yeah, we'll make up stories that are epigenetic or somehow culturally created over the many centuries. But I think there's a problem when we try to extend this to everything else in human development.
Okay.
It's a thought. It's not like a statement. Just.
Okay. Thank you, Hank. Rob?
You've got me thinking about competing narratives. I've been having, since the beginning of the pandemic, a weekly conversation with my college roommate, who was a lawyer and a philosophy major. And probably 25 or 30 years ago, he became a Jehovah's Witness. And after I got over the shock of that, I've discovered that having conversations with him about things like Genesis is a way of exploring competing narratives, particularly about origin myth, which was our yesterday conversation. According to him, the Bible was inspired by or dictated or something by this entity named Jehovah in their worldview. And so everything is true. And he asks me about evolution, and I tell him, to the extent that I understand it, what I think evolution is.
I'm on a Zoom. I'll catch you another time. We'll talk next week. I'm doing something.
Hank, where's that coming from? Not from Hank. Okay, I don't know.
From Ken.
All right, go ahead, Rob.
Anyway, that I try using evolution as a competing origin narrative, and he listens attentively and then completely discounts it because the belief system in which he's embedded doesn't allow for any version that is not the same as his. But then I started thinking, when somebody was talking, I think maybe Ken, about quantum mechanics and the nature of reality, and how my narrative is more about gross physical, perceivable apprehensions of the universe around me, but that there's a much more complex and intricate, and to me fascinating, reality behind that. So that my narrative is actually, I think, perhaps more real than his, but still not real.
And the question is his narrative adaptive for him? And I'd like to ask a question I posed at the beginning and have us spend a little bit of time talking about it. And that was the question about, are there beliefs which are true but harmful? And if so, can people think of some examples of those? Theoretically, when I made my 2x2 table, they should exist, but I'm not sure that examples quickly sprung to my mind. So what do people think? Are there beliefs which are true? And let's leave philosophy of mind out of it and talk about it at the more prosaic level of sort of scientific, factual truth. Are there beliefs which are true but harm people to believe them in some way? Andy?
Yeah. How about climate change is unstoppable, we're doomed?
Okay, so you think that may be true, but it would be harmful because it would create inaction to even attempt to attenuate it.
Inaction and despair and other nasty things. Yeah.
Okay, that seems like it would fit into that cell on the table. Rob?
I saw Oppenheimer the other day, and I think the belief that you can split the atom and create a bomb turned out to be fairly damaging, and yet true.
True but harmful. Okay.
Wonderful example, Rob.
Okay. Other ideas in that regard, Hank? True but harmful beliefs?
Yeah, I would just, what did I do with my comment? Sorry. Oh, yeah. I would expand on your question. And that is, are they true and harmful to whom, when, and in what context? Because I think we have to be a little more precise on these larger terms. Because if we talk about to the human race, I don't know, that's one, but if it's to me or your family, it could be good for your family and bad for my family, or it could be great for all of us. So I think we need to take that construct and make it a little more precise. What idea do we want to think about, and how does it apply to our perception of which group or which individual?
Yeah, when you mention family, for some reason, what sprung into my mind is what if it's true to believe that one of your offspring is much smarter and more capable than another? Is that true but harmful to them rather than harmful to you? But of course, it depends on what actions are attached to the belief. I could hold that belief, but not behave in a way that reveals that belief, and then harm would not be done. Anyhow, Hank, when you mentioned harmful to who, that's really a helpful addition to my question. Andy was up, and then Bob, and then Ken.
Just a quick reference back to one of the questions you posed at the beginning, Steve. Can you willfully believe a falsehood?
Mm-hmm.
I think it's true that we can't just, choose to believe that we're 17-foot tall animated bananas and thereby make it so. So yeah, belief is not purely voluntary. However, it may be more voluntary than some, including Maarten Boudry, seem to think.
Yes, I agree.
Even Pascal, who presented Pascal's wager, basically says at the end, well, if you can't believe that God exists, just fake it. Pretend, go to mass, just keep hanging out with other people who believe, and eventually the belief will become real. We have lots of evidence that such willful approach to believing can work.
Interesting. Bob, and then Ken.
My example is, it touches on, I can't recall if it was Hank that talked about my family and your family could have different outcomes, in groups and out groups. And it is from Jonathan Haidt's The Righteous Mind, as he thought of and evaluated and got data with conservatives, self-identified conservatives, exactly, Ken, valuing loyalty so much more than self-identified liberals. And I think it can be true to say both, that conservative that sees loyalty as a betrayal of loyalty as the most important thing. It is the most important thing to them. And yet it can be so destructive to not just their outgroup, but people that can be defined in their outgroup, but could easily be defined as their in-group, creating, I'm going to say, false boundaries, false in-groups. And I say it this way, if you adjust the boundaries of your in-group enough, all loyalty, every heinous action can be done in the name of loyalty.
Yes, really interesting, Bob. Yeah, that one of the beliefs that we could look at to answer my question are moral beliefs, or beliefs about values. And again, they could be helpful to an in-group, but potentially harmful to an out-group. Very, very good comment, Bob. Thanks. Ken, and then Diane.
Yes. It may sound like I'm pounding at the same nail, but to go back to your example of, one child is much smarter than the other, there are epigenetic drives that are pushing you to want to have great children. And that is inculcated in the children as they're growing up but it is possible to be in a position where you can see that that's happening, to not only be able to acknowledge to yourself that one is smarter than the other, but be able to tell them that, to have one say, you are very intelligent, you don't have a lot of these intellectual skills, you're going to do this, these are the options that are available to you in life, this man has different options, and not place value judgments on them. It's the value judgments and the fact that they're hidden and driven us in an unseen fashion that creates the problem. And so, again, distance from and liberation from those emotional judgments is what
I want to stress, in case any of my 3 children for some reason eventually view this recording, that my example was purely hypothetical. Just for the record, folks. Diane?
I'm gonna pound the same nail too, which is, I really think that when we're talking at the individual level, we are not talking about adaptiveness. We're talking about something else. And we need to distinguish between beliefs and other kinds of things like moral values. You may have beliefs that strengthen your moral values or that detract from them or whatever, but our self-conceptions and all of these things, yes, they may be beneficial to us personally or harmful. But belief, when we talk about beliefs, not in an epistemological sense, but let's say in a social sense, beliefs are things like Rob's friend who is a Jehovah's Witness has a set of beliefs. Now, how do those beliefs function? How could they be adaptive? Now, I think probably there's no Jehovah's Witnesses in this group, so I hope I won't offend anybody. But I mean, we probably all agree that that set of beliefs is not true. It's not a veridical perception of the world. It's not even a very good interpretation of the scriptures or history or anything else. What does it do? Not just for his friend, but for the group as a whole. And especially for it to be so irrational. So early on, Steve was talking about irrational and true, and I sent a note to the chat saying true and rational are not necessarily the same thing, because but then we don't really know what's true, because bat lives in a different world and humans live in a different world. That's another problem. But what being a believer in the Jehovah's Witness story does is it functions to keep the group together, and it functions to establish your position in the group as a reliable, trustworthy member of the group, which means that
let me play devil's advocate with you. How is it harmful to them to believe that?
I didn't say it is.
Okay, I misunderstood. I thought you were implying it was.
No, I'm saying that the question of, particularly at the individual level, help or harm is not really part of adaptation, except insofar as it's going to have downstream effects on reproduction. essentially.
People had individual beliefs about the efficacy of the COVID vaccine, and that certainly had direct
And
impact.
absolutely, it did them a tremendous amount of harm.
Mhm.
Yeah, and you know, if enough of them of a particular group took that line and died at a reproductive age, which most of them were old, so I don't think it's probably going to have any reproductive effects. Then it
harmed both self and others.
It harmed self,
Potentially.
it harmed others. But not only that, it potentially harmed their group. Now that's what I'm trying to get at. To the extent that people collectively believe the same thing, then it's going to maintain a group. And to the extent that you can belong to a group that is self-reproducing, of course, that's likely to be beneficial for you, unless you're
Right.
a Jonestown or something.
Right.
Um,
So one of the themes that is woven throughout our conversation today, I think, is the theme of adaptive for who, and the idea that it can be helpful for one person but harmful for another, or helpful for one group and harmful for another group. Although Maarten Boudry in his TED talk and the talk he gave to the philosophy circle on pro-social world, again, he stressed quite strongly that he felt that any positive effects from a fictional belief, such as group cohesion or identity and all of that, those same benefits could be accomplished by a belief that is true. So why not try to use true beliefs rather than false beliefs? That was, I think, an essence of his argument.
Can I jump right back to that before I see Andy wants to talk? But there's a theory out there that says the more outrageous your beliefs are, the more reliable a member you are seen as. So if you believe things that are really outlandish, that means that you're a real member of that group and people can rely on you and trust you.
Epistemological virtue signaling.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah. I've lost track of the order here. Andy and then Hank, I guess.
I'm just going to say I've lowered my hand because Diane said exactly what I was going to say. The more outlandish, the better binder it is for your in-group.
And wasn't it Joseph Goebbels who famously said it's easier to convince the public of a big lie than a small one? Yeah. Andy and then Hank.
Yeah, a couple of things. I think one question that's been kind of hovering in the background for this entire discussion is, what are beliefs for? Why? What is the function of beliefs? So I think many of us progressives would say that for the most part, beliefs are for representing reality, for making up a accurate picture of the world. But of course, some beliefs serve to cement coalitional loyalty, and other beliefs sort of buttress our mental health, like I'm ultra competent, right? Things like that. So I'm wondering about what you guys think of the following answer. Beliefs are for all of those things. Beliefs are for, number one, representing the world, but also for helping us cope with the world in adaptive, or if you will, advantageous ways. And I think a lot of the really tricky cases come in when believing a particular proposition makes your worldview more accurate but less advantageous, or vice versa.
Right.
Where there are trade-offs between truth and usefulness. I really like Maarten's take on this, that we should really work hard to replace adaptive fictions with adaptive truths whenever we can. Whenever you rest content with an adaptive fiction, you're just biding time until your false belief ends up running you into a wall somewhere.
Well,
Except that it may make you untrustworthy.
Yes, and the other wrinkle there is that he stresses, or other things we read stress, that fiction, which is adaptive now, it might have short-term benefits, but in the long term have costs which outweigh those benefits.
Good.
Hank, Ken, and Anna. I think Anna's probably going to tell us we're running out of time and we need to vote for the next topics. But so let's wrap it up with
Okay.
Ken and Hank, Ken, and then we'll
Yeah.
go to Anna and the vote.
Okay, let's see if I can suggest this hypothesis. The premise is that the most important thing for individual and survival is to belong. I don't know if people agree or disagree, but let's say that's so. So the most important, like when I work as a therapist, what I've learned from our work together here in evolutionary biology and all is that belonging is so basic to us that we'll do anything to belong, even twist ourselves into a pretzel or become mentally ill if you want to go to an extreme. So fictions or belief serve the biological purpose of belonging for the purpose of surviving and reproducing. And then one more step, not just reproducing and surviving, but being out of danger for being dismissed from the group where your survival is endangered. So I want to suggest that as a kind of a bottom line way of looking at beliefs, fictional truth, not truth. They're about belonging, and what we have to do to survive is to belong.
Well, no argument for me there. We are primates after all, right? We're social beings. Ken?
Okay, two. Number one, one thing about the way our brain works is we tend to make, in the line of what you might even call a belief, is we tend to make assumptions because it's efficient. You can't test every idea you've ever had at every moment. The example I give is you walk up the front walk of your house when you're maybe the day you're buying it and you look at the way the stones were placed and you say, oh, very nice. Oh, I could put some flowers here and there. And the next time you walk up, you don't look at the stones because you kind of know where they are. And a month later, some frost comes and heaves one up and you stub your toe when you walk by because you didn't see it, because you've made an assumption by it. We gather some information and then we say, well, this is the way it is. And it's mentally efficient for us to do so. And so we have tons of these assumptions made that we function, that we don't test. If we were constantly testing everything, it would be beyond the 85 billion neurons in our brain. So that's number one, we tend to make assumptions. Number two, and again, just to answer Hank's question, beliefs are the glue that held, as you said, held you to the group, in this case, the social group. But what's very interesting, by the way, is what happens when you get a nation like the United States that says Congress will make no law respecting an establishment of religion. You get all sorts of social groups growing up within that. And, a giant one, of course, was Mormonism. They wanted their own nation for a while. And so that's that. That's belief is all about adherence to the social group.
Well, I believe it's almost the hour, so I'm going to turn things over to Anna, and she's going to let us vote on next month's topic, I think, with a link probably a link. Yep. So if you see a link in the chat and go there, there's 3 topics listed, I believe, and you can vote for one or more of them, and Anna will tell us the winner. So take a moment to do that. Are you seeing some votes, Anna?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, we are up to 5.
Ooh, it's a toughie.
Well, you can vote for more than one, and if we don't do one next month, we could do it the following month. It depends on how much enthusiasm there is for them.
So I'm going to run. Thanks for an enjoyable day.
See you again, Bob.
I know.
I'm going to sign off too. Steve, nice job. Hey, it was great to see everybody. That was fun.
Thank you, Andy.
See you around.
What are the results, Anna?
All right, so we have, yep, eight responses. So the winner is evolutionary aesthetics. How do evolutionary processes shape our perceptions and preferences for art, music, and other aesthetic experiences?
Okay, do we know who, because the way this usually works is that whoever nominated the topic facilitates the discussion. Did one of us nominate that topic, or is it a holdover from the past? Ken, it's your topic?
I selected it as as my only selection of the three.
No, did you submit the topic? Did you nominate the topic?
No.
Okay. Well, Anna, we'll have to find that out. Maybe Sage would know. Because typically if you suggest a topic, like I suggested today's topic, so that's why I'm leading the discussion. If Rob suggests a topic and it gets picked, Rob leads the discussion. We're a very flat organization in that way. So
I did dodge that when I suggested one though, so.
yeah, I worry a little bit that may it's very democratic, but maybe it will dampen people's enthusiasm for suggesting topics. But at any rate, I guess we'll have to leave that to Sage. Maybe that's one of Sage's topics. He might have nominated that himself too. But well, listen, everybody, thank you very much for coming. I hope it was
Thank you.
worthwhile.
Bye-bye.
Can I ask one
yes.
question? Does anybody else also feel that I thought we just scratched the surface on today's topic?
Of course.
Oh,
I agree.
We got to keep grooming ourselves.
yeah, that's usually what this group does, is scratch the surface of a topic for an
We
hour.
scratched a lot of surfaces.
Yes, our interests are a mile wide and an inch deep, I'm afraid, is what happened. By the way, you mentioned, just before we go, and unrelated to all of this, you mentioned Jonathan Haidt's and his book, The Righteous Mind. I just came across today what his new book is going to be on. It's called The Anxious Generation, and it's about his theories about why there's been a rise in mental health issues among adolescents and young adults. And the two prime candidates he suggests are social media, unsurprisingly, and the decline in unstructured, unsupervised play.
Helicopter parenting.
Yeah, yeah. So
Yes.
at any rate, I'm looking forward to reading his next book on that topic. So have a good day, everybody. Take care. Bye-bye.